Rose was 22 years old when she signed the contract that would change her life forever. Not out of desperation, not out of weakness, but because she had learned very early that dignity isn't about refusing opportunities. It's about how you walk through each one of them. The man seated across the table watched her with eyes that seemed to calculate the weight of her every breath. Thomas Francesco, 27 years old, heir to an empire built on secrets no one dared speak aloud. And now he needed something all his money couldn't simply buy, a legitimate heir. The agreement was clear, cold, surgical. Rose would live in the mansion for 12 months. After 2 months of adjustment, the insemination would be performed. No physical contact, no feelings. Just a borrowed body to ensure the continuation of the Francesco name. And when the child was born, Rose would leave, with a sum that would change her future, and a silence that would guarantee her survival. But there are things contracts cannot predict, and there are hearts that simply don't know how to read clauses. If you're the kind of person who gets invested in stories like this, who roots for the characters, who suffers alongside them, who can't stop until you find out what happens in the end, then this channel was made for you. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, and come with me. Because this story is just beginning, and I promise you, every minute will be worth it. The library smelled of old leather, polished wood, and silence. It was the kind of room built to intimidate, with bookshelves climbing to the ceiling and portraits of stern men watching from gilded frames. Rose knew this trick. She had been in rooms designed to make people like her feel small. She didn't feel small. Rose closed the leather folder with steady fingers, not a single tremor. She had rehearsed this moment so many times in her mind that it now seemed almost unreal to finally be here. You understood all the clauses? The lawyer's voice was nasal, bureaucratic, as if he were closing on a real estate purchase. Every single one, Rose answered, holding his gaze without blinking. Thomas watched from where he stood near the window, the late afternoon light cutting his silhouette. His hands were in the pockets of his dark suit, a studied posture, controlled, like everything about him. Rose noticed he hadn't sat down once during the entire meeting. He kept his distance. He kept his height. But when she answered the lawyer, something shifted. For 1 second, just 1 second, Thomas tilted his head slightly, and his eyes met hers. Not with arrogance, not with indifference, but with something that looked almost like curiosity. As if he had expected to find fear there, and had found something else instead. Something he couldn't name. The moment passed so quickly, Rose almost doubted she had seen it. 3 days, Thomas said, turning back to the window. In 3 days, you will become Mrs. Cordelia Francesco in the eyes of the world. No one, besides the people in this room, will know the true nature of this arrangement. Not my family, not my associates. For all intents and purposes, you will be my wife. Rose nodded. And when the 12 months are over, you disappear, with everything that was promised. He turned to face her again, and this time his voice carried a different weight. And you never speak the name Francesco again. For your own safety. For my own safety. Rose almost smiled. If he knew what she was running from, perhaps he would understand that safety was a relative concept. Unconsciously, her fingers brushed the inside of her left wrist, where a thin, pale scar disappeared beneath her blazer sleeve. A reminder, a promise. The reason she needed to vanish from the world for at least a year, and there was no safer place to disappear than inside the fortress of a man no one dared challenge. The lawyer cleared his throat, gathering his documents. If you'll allow me, there is one final formality. He hesitated, glancing at Thomas. Regarding the previous arrangement, the confidentiality terms still apply, and there is nothing to discuss about that, Thomas cut in, his voice sharp as glass. The previous arrangement doesn't exist. It never existed. Is that clear? The lawyer paled. Perfectly clear, Mr. Francesco. Rose pretended not to notice. But she filed that information away in a corner of her mind. Previous arrangement. So she wasn't the first. What had happened to the other one? Elena was the one who led her to the room. The housekeeper was over 60, with gray hair pulled into an impeccable bun, and the kind of posture that said, "I have seen many things in this house, and I have survived them all." But when she looked at Rose, something in her eyes softened, something that seemed almost maternal. "This will be your room, ma'am." She opened the door with a careful gesture. "If you need anything at any hour, simply ring the bell beside the bed. I will come myself." Rose stepped inside and took in the space. It was spacious, decorated in shades of cream and gold, with a bed that seemed made for royalty. Fresh flowers in a vase on the dresser. Soft towels already arranged in the marble bathroom. An open closet revealed clothes in her exact size. Everything planned, everything calculated. As if she were a piece being positioned on a board. "It's beautiful," Rose said, because it was true. "Thank you, Elena." The housekeeper seemed surprised by the gratitude. Perhaps it wasn't common in this house. "You are kind, ma'am." She paused briefly, as if weighing her next words. "If you'll permit me a piece of advice, Mrs. Rose, in this house, not everything is what it seems, and not everyone is who they pretend to be. Trust your instincts. They will serve you well." Before Rose could respond, Elena gave a brief bow and withdrew, closing the door without a sound. The silence that remained was too heavy for the size of the room. Rose walked to the window and looked out at the garden stretching as far as the eye could see. Gardeners worked in silence down below. Security guards patrolled the perimeters with the discretion of shadows. And somewhere in this estate, the man who would be her pretend husband had probably already returned to his business, forgetting she existed. She didn't mind that. She wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to survive. Downstairs, in a study that smelled of cigars and ambition, Margareth Francesco poured herself a glass of red wine while studying a photograph above the fireplace. The photo showed Thomas as a teenager, perhaps 15, standing beside a blonde girl of the same age. They were both smiling. They looked happy. Margareth took a long sip and set the glass down harder than she intended. "Mrs. Francesco?" A maid appeared at the door, hesitant. "The new guest has been settled in the East Room as ordered." Margareth didn't turn around. Did she ask questions? "No, ma'am." She was polite. Polite. The word came out like poison. They always are, in the beginning. "Is there anything else you need?" "Yes." Margareth finally turned, and her gaze was cold enough to freeze blood. "Find out everything about her, where she came from, what she did, why she accepted this. I want to know every secret, every lie, every skeleton." She approached the maid, lowering her voice. "Because no one accepts an arrangement like this without running from something. And when I discover what she's running from, I will use it to destroy her." The maid swallowed hard and nodded, hurrying out. Margareth turned back to the window, looking toward the third floor, where a light had just come on. "Enjoy it while you can, dear. You will never give an heir to this family." In the East Room, Rose lay on the enormous bed, staring at the ornate plaster ceiling. Her hands rested on her still flat belly. At some point in the coming months, a child would grow inside her. A child she would carry, feel move, perhaps love before she even knew its face. A child she would have to leave behind. Rose closed her eyes. She had accepted this. She had signed. She knew exactly what she was getting into. But as the darkness of the room wrapped around her, an uncomfortable truth began to form in the corners of her consciousness. A truth she would try to ignore for the coming months, without success. Contracts can define terms. They can establish deadlines. They can promise silence and distance and coldness. But contracts know nothing about the human heart. And in the world of the Francescos, where power and danger walked hand in hand, loving someone was the most dangerous decision a person could make. The 3 days passed like a dream wrapped in silk and thorns. Rose spent most of that time learning the architecture of her new cage. The mansion had 47 rooms, 3 kitchens, 2 libraries, and more secrets than she could count. She memorized the hallways, the exits, the places where shadows gathered thick enough to hide. Old habits. The kind you develop when running has become your second language. On the morning of the 3rd day, a team of stylists arrived before dawn. They worked on her for hours, hair, makeup, nails, skin, until Rose barely recognized the woman staring back from the mirror. The white dress they brought was simple but exquisite, designed to whisper elegance rather than scream wealth. Someone had chosen it with care. She wondered if it had been Thomas, then dismissed the thought as ridiculous. The ceremony took place in the mansion's private chapel, a small stone building nestled among ancient oaks at the edge of the property. Only 6 people attended: Thomas, Rose, the officiant, the lawyer, Elena, and a man Rose hadn't seen before, tall, dark-haired, with watchful eyes that seemed to catalogue everything. "Dominic Verani," Thomas said by way of introduction, his voice flat. "My right hand. He knows everything. You can trust him." Dominic offered her a nod, but no smile. Rose returned the gesture. She understood men like him. Loyalty carved into bone. The kind who would kill or die without hesitation if Thomas asked. The kind who were watching her now, measuring, waiting to see if she would become a threat. The vows were brief, clinical. When Thomas slipped the ring onto her finger, a band of white gold with a single diamond, his touch lasted exactly 2 seconds. Rose counted. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant said. Thomas leaned in. Rose's breath caught, but his lips only brushed her cheek, light as wind, there and gone before she could register warmth. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Francesco," he murmured against her ear, and then he stepped back, and the distance between them returned, like a wall, rebuilding itself. That night, there was a dinner, not a celebration. Thomas had made clear there would be no public announcement, no reception, no fanfare. But Margaret had insisted on a small family gathering, and Rose was beginning to understand that in this house, Margaret's insistence was not easily refused. The dining room could seat 30. Tonight, only 8 chairs were occupied. Rose sat at Thomas's right, wearing a midnight blue dress Elena had selected for her. Across the table, Margaret presided like a queen holding court, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "So, Cordelia," Margaret said, using the name Rose would now answer to in public. "Thomas tells me you worked in event planning before this arrangement." Rose set down her wineglass with deliberate calm. "I did. Corporate events mostly. Conferences, product launches, executive retreats." "How quaint." Margaret's tone made the word sound like an insult. "And your family? Where are they?" The table fell silent. Rose felt every eye turn toward her. "Gone," she said simply. "I've been on my own since I was 18. "How tragic." Margaret tilted her head, a predator scenting blood. "No parents? No siblings? No one at all who might miss you?" The threat beneath the question was barely concealed. Rose recognized it. She had heard variations of it before, from people far more dangerous than this woman. She smiled. "No one at all, Mrs. Francesco. I suppose that makes me perfect for this arrangement, doesn't it? No complications, no attachments. No one asking uncomfortable questions." Something flickered in Margaret's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect for an opponent who refused to cower. At the head of the table, Thomas watched the exchange in silence. But when Rose glanced his way, she caught something unexpected in his expression. Not quite admiration, but close. The dinner continued. Conversations flowed around Rose like water around a stone. Business matters she didn't understand. Family gossip about people she'd never met. References to a world she was only beginning to glimpse. She listened more than she spoke, filing away names, relationships, tensions. And she noticed things. She noticed how Dominic's jaw tightened whenever Margaret addressed Thomas. She noticed how the servants moved more quietly when Margaret was in the room, as if afraid of drawing her attention. She noticed the empty chair at the far end of the table, set with plates and silverware but clearly meant to remain unoccupied. When dessert arrived, Rose leaned slightly toward Elena, who stood nearby, supervising the service. "The empty chair," she whispered. "Who is it for?" Elena's face remained impassive, but her voice dropped low. "Mr. Francesco's father. He passed 3 years ago. Mrs. Margaret insists the place be set for every family dinner." Rose looked at the empty chair again, then at Margaret, who was laughing at something one of the cousins had said. A woman who set a place for her dead husband at every meal. Was it grief, devotion, or something darker, a refusal to let go of control, even over the departed? After dinner, the guests dispersed to various corners of the mansion. Rose excused herself early, claiming fatigue, and made her way toward the east wing. But as she climbed the stairs, footsteps echoed behind her. She turned. Thomas stood at the bottom of the staircase, hands in his pockets, watching her. "You handled my mother well," he said. Rose paused, one hand on the banister. "Was that a test?" "Everything in this house is a test." He climbed a few steps, closing some of the distance between them. "She'll try again. She'll keep trying until she finds a weakness. Then I'll make sure she doesn't find one." Thomas studied her for a long moment. The chandelier above cast shifting shadows across his face, making his expression impossible to read. "Why did you really accept this arrangement, Rose?" The question caught her off guard. She had expected coldness from him, indifference, the transactional distance of a man who viewed her as a means to an end. She had not expected curiosity. "Does it matter?" she asked. "It might. I needed to disappear for a while. You offered the perfect hiding place." She met his eyes steadily. "We both get what we want. Isn't that enough?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he climbed another step, then another, until only 3 stairs separated them. "My mother thinks you're running from something. She's already started digging into your past." Rosie's heart stuttered, but she kept her face neutral. "Will she find anything?" "That depends." Thomas's voice dropped lower. "Is there anything to find?" The air between them felt suddenly charged, heavy with unspoken questions. Rose thought of the scar on her wrist, the name she had buried, the man who was still looking for her, even now, even after everything. "Nothing that would affect our arrangement," she said carefully. Thomas held her gaze for a beat longer. Then he nodded, stepping back. "Good. Keep it that way." He turned and descended the stairs without looking back. Rose watched him go, her pulse slowly returning to normal. But as she continued to her room, a new fear had taken root in her chest. Margaret was digging, and there were things buried in Rose's past that, if uncovered, wouldn't just end this arrangement. They would end her life. That night, Rose dreamed of fire. She dreamed of a house burning, of screams swallowed by smoke, of hands reaching for her through the flames. She dreamed of running, always running, and of a voice behind her, calm and patient and terrifying. "You can't hide forever, Rose. You belong to me." She woke gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, her heart slamming against her ribs. The room was dark, the mansion was silent. But somewhere in the distance, a car engine rumbled to life and faded into the night. And Rose lay awake until dawn, wondering who had left the estate at 3 a.m, and why. The first 2 weeks in the mansion passed in a strange rhythm of silence and observation. Rose learned to navigate the unspoken rules of the household. Breakfast was served at 7, but Thomas rarely appeared before 8, and when he did, he took his coffee standing by the window, reading reports on his tablet, barely acknowledging her presence. Lunch was informal, trays delivered to wherever one happened to be. Dinner was the only meal where attendance was expected, and even then Thomas was often absent, called away by business that no one explained. She saw him in glimpses, crossing the hallway with Dominic at his side, voices low, disappearing into his study for hours, the door always locked. Returning late at night, when Rose would hear his footsteps in the corridor outside her room, pausing, or did she imagine that, before continuing to the master suite at the opposite end of the wing. They lived in the same house like two planets in separate orbits. But Rose was not idle. She spent her mornings in the library, reading everything she could find about the Francesco family. The official history was impressive. Generations of businessmen, philanthropists, pillars of the community. But between the lines, she sensed something else. Gaps in the record. Names that appeared once and then vanished. A pattern of tragedy that seemed almost too consistent to be coincidence. Thomas's father, Victor Francesco, had died 3 years ago. Heart attack, according to the obituary. But Elena, in one of her unguarded moments, had mentioned something about that terrible night before catching herself and changing the subject. Rose filed it away. Another piece of a puzzle she was only beginning to see. In the afternoons, she explored the grounds. The estate covered nearly 200 acres. Gardens, forests, a small lake, and several outbuildings whose purposes she couldn't guess. She walked for hours, letting the fresh air clear her mind, always aware of the security cameras tracking her movements. One afternoon, 3 weeks into her stay, she wandered farther than usual and found herself at the edge of a rose garden that seemed older than the rest. The bushes were overgrown, the paths neglected, but someone had recently placed fresh flowers at the base of a small stone bench. Rose knelt to examine them. White lilies, still fresh, left within the last day or two. That was my sister's favorite spot. She spun around. Thomas stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. He wore a simple white shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, and looked younger somehow, less guarded. "Your sister?" Rose rose to her feet, brushing dirt from her knees. "I didn't know you had a sister." "I don't. Not anymore." He walked past her to the bench and sat down, looking at the lilies. "Catalina. She was 2 years younger than me. She died when we were teenagers." Rose hesitated, then sat beside him, leaving a careful distance between them. "What happened?" "Officially, a drowning accident. She went swimming in the lake at night and never came back." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Unofficially? I don't know. I've spent 12 years trying to find out." The grief in his voice was old, but still raw, like a wound that had never properly healed. Rose recognized that kind of pain. She carried her own version of it. "The girl in the photograph," she said quietly. "In your mother's study. The blonde one standing next to you. That was her." Thomas turned to look at her, surprise flickering in his eyes. "You're observant." "I pay attention. That's dangerous in this house." "So I've been told." A ghost of a smile crossed his face, the first she had ever seen from him. It transformed him, softening the hard angles, revealing a glimpse of the boy he must have been before loss and responsibility had turned him to stone. "You're different from what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who could be bought. Someone who would keep her head down, do what was required, and leave without looking back. And I'm not that?" Thomas studied her, his gaze traveling over her face as if searching for something. "No," he said finally, "you're not." The moment stretched between them, fragile and charged. Rose felt suddenly aware of the warmth of the sun, the scent of roses in the air, the sound of his breathing. She felt aware of him in a way that unsettled her. Then Thomas stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "The insemination is scheduled for next week," he said, his voice returning to its usual businesslike tone. "Dr. Harmon will explain the procedure. It's straightforward, clinical, as we agreed." Rose nodded, ignoring the strange tightness in her chest. "As we agreed." He walked away without another word, but at the edge of the garden he paused and looked back. The roses here were Catalina's project. She planted every one of them. I come here sometimes to remember. Before Rose could respond, he was gone. She sat alone on the stone bench for a long time, watching the sunlight shift through the leaves, thinking about a girl who had drowned in a lake at night and a brother who still brought flowers to her garden 12 years later. And she wondered what else this family was hiding. The answer came sooner than she expected. That evening, Rose was dressing for dinner when a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Elena, pale-faced and trembling. "Mrs. Rose, you must come quickly. There's been a discovery." Rose followed her down the corridor, past the main staircase, and into a part of the house she hadn't yet explored. Elena stopped before a heavy oak door and pushed it open. Inside was a small sitting room, decorated in faded florals and antique furniture. It had the feeling of a space preserved in time, untouched for years. And in the center of the room, Margaret stood holding a leather journal, her face twisted with triumph. "Ah, there she is. Our mysterious bride." Margaret's smile was venomous. "I told Thomas I would find the truth about you, and look what I discovered." Rose's blood ran cold when she saw the journal. She recognized the cover, the brass clasp, the initials embossed in the corner. It was hers. "How did you get that?" Rose's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Does it matter? What matters is what's inside." Margaret opened the journal and began to read aloud. March 15th. He found me again. I thought Chicago would be far enough, but I was wrong. The flowers were on my doorstep when I came home. White roses. His signature. I have to run again. I have to. That's enough. Thomas's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood in the doorway, Dominic at his shoulder, his expression thunderous. "Thomas, darling, you need to hear this." Margaret held up the journal. "Your wife is being hunted. Someone is following her. Someone dangerous. She's brought that danger into our home." I said enough. Thomas crossed the room and took the journal from his mother's hands. "This was in her private quarters. You had no right. I have every right to protect this family. By violating the privacy of a woman under my protection," Thomas's voice dropped to something cold and dangerous. "You forget yourself, Mother." Margaret's face flushed with anger, but she held her tongue. Rose watched the power shift between them, mother and son, old authority and new, and saw something she hadn't expected. Thomas was protecting her. "Everyone out," Thomas ordered. "Dominic, escort my mother to her rooms. Elena, see that we're not disturbed." The room emptied. The door closed. And Rose found herself alone with Thomas, her stolen journal in his hands. "Who is hunting you?" he asked quietly. Rose closed her eyes. She had known this moment would come eventually. She had just hoped for more time. "His name is Marcus Webb. We were engaged 3 years ago." She opened her eyes and met Thomas's gaze. "When I tried to leave him, he didn't take it well." Define didn't take it well. Rose pushed up her sleeve, revealing the scar on her wrist. Longer now, in full view, a thin white line that curved from her wrist to her forearm. "He said if he couldn't have me, no one would. I barely survived." Her voice was flat, factual, as if recounting someone else's story. "I've been running ever since. New cities, new names, new lives. But he always finds me." Thomas stared at the scar, something dark moving behind his eyes. "Is that why you accepted this arrangement?" "Partly. I needed to disappear completely. What better place to hide than inside a family that no one dares to cross?" A bitter smile touched her lips. "But now your mother knows. And if she knows, others might find out. And if Marcus learns where I am, he won't touch you." The words were quiet but absolute. Rose looked at Thomas, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't expected. Not the cold businessman, not the distant husband of convenience, but a man who understood what it meant to lose someone. A man who knew that some monsters wore human faces. "You don't know what he's capable of," she said, "and he doesn't know what I'm capable of." Thomas handed the journal back to her. "You're under the protection of the Francesco family now. Whatever that means to the outside world, to Marcus Webb, it means this. If he comes for you, he'll have to go through me first." Rose took the journal, her fingers brushing his. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent warmth spreading through her chest. "Why?" she whispered. "This wasn't part of our agreement." Thomas was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough, as if the words cost him something. "Because 12 years ago, I couldn't protect my sister. I watched my family fall apart because I was too young, too weak, too blind to see what was happening." His eyes met hers, and the pain in them took her breath away. "I won't make that mistake again." He left her standing in the middle of the faded sitting room, holding her journal to her chest, her heart beating in a rhythm she didn't recognize. And for the first time since signing the contract, Rose allowed herself to feel something she had sworn to avoid. Hope. That night, the mansion was quiet, but Rose couldn't sleep. She stood at her window, watching the moonlight silver the gardens below, thinking about scars and secrets and a man who had promised to protect her without asking for anything in return. She thought about Catalina, drowned in a lake under mysterious circumstances. She thought about the previous arrangement that no one would discuss. She thought about Margaret, who had declared war and would not stop until Rose was destroyed. And she thought about Thomas, his grief, his guardedness, the unexpected warmth that flickered beneath the ice. This was supposed to be a transaction. 12 months, a child, a departure. But standing there in the darkness, Rose felt the edges of the contract beginning to blur. And she knew, with a certainty that frightened her, that when the time came to leave, it would not be as simple as walking away. Nothing about this would be simple ever again. The insemination was performed on a grey Tuesday morning, in a sterile room that smelled of antiseptic and silence. Dr. Harmon was professional, efficient and kind in the detached way medical professionals often are. She explained each step in a calm voice, answered Rose's questions without judgment, and treated the entire procedure as exactly what it was, a clinical transaction, nothing more. Thomas was not present. Rose had not expected him to be. Afterward, she lay on the examination table for the required 30 minutes, staring at the ceiling tiles, trying not to think about what was happening inside her body. Trying not to imagine a tiny cluster of cells that might, at this very moment, be taking root. A child that would never know she was its mother. Elena came to collect her when it was over. The older woman said nothing as they walked back through the mansion's winding corridors, but her hand found Rose's elbow at one point, a brief touch, warm and reassuring, before withdrawing. In her room, Rose sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her palms flat against her stomach. Nothing felt different. But everything had changed. The 2 weeks that followed were the longest of Rose's life. She was told to rest, to avoid stress, to eat well, and sleep often. The irony wasn't lost on her. Avoiding stress while living under the same roof as Margaret Francesco, who had not spoken a single word to Rose since the confrontation in the sitting room. The silence was worse than hostility. It meant Margaret was planning something. Thomas, too, had grown distant. Rose saw him at dinners, exchanged polite words about weather and schedules, but the connection they had begun to build in Catalina's garden seemed to have retreated behind walls she couldn't scale. She told herself it didn't matter. This was a business arrangement. His distance was appropriate, even necessary. She almost believed it. On the 14th day, Dr. Harmon returned with a blood test kit. Rose sat very still as the needle pierced her vein, watching her blood flow into the vial, dark and ordinary-looking. "We'll have the results within 24 hours, the doctor said. "I'll call Mr. Francesco directly." "Not me." Dr. Harmon hesitated. "My instructions were to report to Mr. Francesco first, but I can inform you simultaneously, if you prefer." Rose shook her head slowly. "No. Follow your instructions." It was better this way. Distant, clinical, as agreed. That night, Rose dreamed of a baby with Thomas's dark eyes and her own blonde hair, reaching for her with tiny fingers she would never be allowed to hold. She woke with tears on her pillow and an ache in her chest that no contract had prepared her for. The call came the next evening. Rose was in the library, trying to read a novel she had started 3 weeks ago and still couldn't focus on, when Thomas appeared in the doorway. She knew immediately. His face was carefully blank, but there was something in the way he stood. A certain tension in his shoulders, a brightness in his eyes that he couldn't quite conceal. "It worked," he said. 2 words, a universe contained within them. Rose set the book down with hands that trembled slightly. "I'm pregnant." Thomas nodded. He stepped into the library and closed the door behind him, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he crossed the room and sat in the chair across from her, closer than he had been in weeks. And when he looked at her, the mask had slipped just enough for Rose to see what lay beneath. Wonder, fear, and something that looked almost like gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. Rose didn't know how to respond. What did one say in a moment like this? Congratulations felt absurd. Your welcome felt insufficient. And the truth, that she was already terrified of loving a child she would have to surrender, was too raw to speak aloud. "What happens now?" she asked instead. "Now we wait. 9 months. You'll have the best care available. Doctors, nutritionists, whatever you need. Your only job is to stay healthy." He paused. "And safe." Safe. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. "Has there been any sign of Marcus?" Rose asked. "Dominic has people watching. So far, nothing. But I've increased security around the estate just in case." Thomas leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "If anything changes, if you see anything suspicious, you come to me immediately." "Understood?" "Understood." He held her gaze for a beat longer than necessary, and Rose felt again that strange pull between them, invisible threads tightening, drawing them closer despite every logical reason to stay apart. Then Thomas stood, and the moment broke. "Get some rest. We'll discuss the details tomorrow." He was almost to the door when Rose spoke. "Thomas," he turned, "your sister, Catalina." Rose took a breath. "You said she drowned, but you've spent 12 years looking for the truth. What do you think really happened?" The question clearly caught him off guard. For a moment, Rose thought he would refuse to answer. But then something shifted in his expression. A decision made, and he walked back to where she sat. "I think she was murdered," he said, his voice low. "I think someone in this house killed her, or had her killed. And I think my mother knows more than she's ever admitted." Rose felt cold despite the warm room. "Your mother? I'm not saying she did it, but she was the last person to see Catalina alive. She was the one who found her body, and she's the one who made sure the investigation was closed as quickly as possible." Thomas's jaw tightened. "I was 15. I trusted her. I believed her when she said it was an accident. But the older I get, the more questions I have. And she refuses to answer any of them. Why are you telling me this?" Thomas looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because you're carrying my child now. Because you're part of this family, whether anyone likes it or not. And because if something happens to me, I need someone outside of this to know the truth." He paused. "I'm not sure I can trust anyone who grew up in this house. But you have no history here. No loyalty to the old ways. You might be the only honest person under this roof." Rose didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified by that assessment. "I don't know if I'm honest," she said carefully. "But I know what it's like to live surrounded by lies. And I know what it costs to dig for the truth, when everyone wants it to stay buried." Thomas studied her for a long moment. "Yes," he said finally. "I believe you do." He left without another word. But something had shifted between them. A door opened that couldn't be closed again. The weeks turned to months. Rose's body changed slowly at first, then all at once. By the third month, the nausea had passed, replaced by a strange new energy and a growing awareness of the life inside her. She caught herself sometimes with her hand on her belly, feeling for movement too early to detect, imagining what the child would look like. Thomas's eyes, her hair, his stubborn jaw, her curious nature, a dangerous game, a foolish hope. But she couldn't stop herself from playing it. And Thomas was changing too. It began with small things. He started joining her for breakfast, setting aside his tablet to ask how she had slept. He remembered her favorite tea and made sure the kitchen stocked it. He shortened his business trips, delegating what could be delegated so he could be present at her medical appointments. One evening, 4 months into the pregnancy, Rose found him waiting for her in the garden, Catalina's garden, which had slowly become theirs. "Walk with me?" he asked. They walked in comfortable silence, the autumn air crisp and clean, leaves crunching beneath their feet. The rose bushes had been pruned for winter, but a few stubborn blooms remained, clinging to life despite the cold. "I've been thinking about names," Thomas said. Rose glanced at him, surprised. "Already? It's not too early to consider options." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket and handed it to her. "I made a list, but I wanted your input." Rose unfolded the paper and scanned the names. Some were traditional, classic. Others were more unusual, unexpected from a man who seemed so conventional. "Isabella," she read aloud. "Charlotte, Lily." She looked up. "These are all girls' names." "I know, I have a feeling." His mouth quirked in that rare half-smile she had grown to treasure. "Call it intuition." Rose looked back at the list, her heart suddenly too large for her chest. "I like Lily," she said softly. "For Catalina's garden." Thomas went very still. When Rose looked up again, his eyes were bright with something she was afraid to name. "Lily," he repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, that's perfect." They stood there in the fading light, the name hanging between them like a promise, and Rose felt the last of her defenses begin to crumble. This was supposed to be a transaction, a contract, 12 months, and goodbye. But looking at Thomas now, seeing the man beneath the armor, knowing that they were creating a life together, however clinical the method, Rose understood that some things couldn't be quantified or contained. Some things simply grew, whether you wanted them to or not. Like roses in winter, like a child in the womb, like love, taking root in the most inhospitable soil, refusing to be denied. That night, Rose woke to the sound of breaking glass. She sat up in bed, heart pounding, every sense alert. The mansion was silent, too silent, the kind of quiet that felt deliberate rather than peaceful. Then she heard it. Footsteps, slow, measured, coming from somewhere below. Rose slipped out of bed and moved to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. The footsteps had stopped, but now there were voices, low, urgent, impossible to make out. She eased the door open and crept into the hallway. The house was dark, but she knew the route by now, could navigate it with her eyes closed. She made her way to the landing overlooking the main entrance hall and crouched behind the banister. Below, she saw Thomas and Dominic standing over someone, a man, kneeling on the marble floor, hands zip-tied behind his back. Blood dripped from a cut on his forehead, bright red against the pale stone. "Who sent you?" Thomas's voice was ice and steel, nothing like the man who had discussed baby names in the garden hours before. The intruder spat blood and laughed. "You think this ends here, Francesco? You have no idea what's coming." Dominic grabbed the man by the hair, yanking his head back. "Answer the question." But the man's eyes slid upward, scanning the darkness of the upper floors. And for one terrible moment, they locked onto Rose. He smiled. "Tell your wife," he said, loud enough for his voice to carry, "that Marcus sends his regards." Rose's blood turned to ice. He had found her. Even here, even inside the fortress, Marcus had found her. Thomas looked up, following the intruder's gaze, and saw Rose standing frozen on the landing. Their eyes met across the distance, and she saw in his face the same realization that was crashing through her. The protection he had promised, the safety of the Francesco name, none of it had been enough. The war had come to them, and it was only beginning. The intruder's name was Daniel Kovac, a former military contractor turned mercenary, hired through a chain of intermediaries that Dominic spent 3 days unraveling. At the end of that chain, as Rose had known there would be, was Marcus Webb. Thomas had the man taken to a location Rose wasn't told about. She didn't ask what happened there. Some questions were better left unspoken in a house like this, and Rose had learned to recognize the boundaries between what she needed to know and what would only add weight to her conscience. What she did know was this: Marcus hadn't sent Kovac to kill her. Not yet. The intrusion had been a message, a reminder, a promise that no walls were high enough, no family powerful enough, to keep her hidden forever. For 3 days after the break-in, Rose didn't leave her room. She told herself it was caution, rest, protection for the baby. But the truth was simpler and more shameful. She was afraid. The fortress she had believed impenetrable had been breached, and the illusion of safety had shattered like the glass Kovac had broken to enter. On the 4th day, Thomas came to her. He didn't knock, simply opened the door and stood in the threshold, taking in the sight of her, still in her robe at midday, curtains drawn, a half-eaten tray of food on the nightstand. "This has to stop," he said. Rose looked up from the book she hadn't been reading. "I'm being careful. You're hiding." He crossed the room and pulled back the curtains, flooding the space with autumn light. "And I understand why. But if you let him reduce you to this, if you let fear keep you locked in a room for the rest of your pregnancy, then he's already won." Rose flinched at the truth of it. "You don't know what he's capable of. Then tell me." Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, closer than he had ever been in this room. "Tell me everything. Not the summary you gave before. Everything. I need to understand what we're dealing with." Rose closed her eyes. She had spent 3 years trying to forget. But Thomas was right. If they were going to fight this, he needed to know the full story. So she told him. She told him about meeting Marcus at a charity gala when she was 19. How charming he had been, how attentive. How he had seemed like everything she had ever wanted. Successful, sophisticated, devoted. She told him about the gradual isolation, so subtle she hadn't recognized it until she had no friends left, no family who would take her calls, no world outside the one Marcus controlled. She told him about the first time he hit her, and the second, and all the times after that, each one followed by tears and apologies and promises that it would never happen again. She told him about the night she had finally tried to leave. The knife, the blood, the hospital where she had given a false name because Marcus had connections everywhere, and telling the truth would have meant death. She told him about the years of running, the cities, the identities, the constant looking over her shoulder, the white roses that appeared wherever she went, on her doorstep, on her car, once even inside her locked apartment. Marcus's way of saying, "I see you. I will always see you." When she finished, her voice was hoarse and her cheeks were wet with tears she hadn't felt falling. Thomas hadn't moved, hadn't interrupted, had simply listened with an intensity that made her feel, for the first time in years, truly heard. "He's not going to touch you," Thomas said quietly. "I don't care what it takes. I don't care what lines I have to cross. That man will never hurt you again." Rose shook her head. "You can't promise that. He's obsessed. He doesn't think like normal people. He'll wait years if he has to. He'll—" "Rose." Thomas reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and dry, his grip gentle but firm. "Look at me. She did. I am not a good man. I've done things that would horrify you if you knew. I've made choices that weigh on me every day. But I protect what's mine. And you, he paused, something flickering in his eyes. You're mine now. You and this child. Whatever happens, I will keep you safe. Even if it costs me everything. Rose stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. Why? She whispered. This isn't what we agreed to. This was supposed to be clinical, transactional. Why do you care what happens to me? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough. Because I stopped seeing you as a transaction a long time ago. He released her hand and stood abruptly, as if he had said more than he intended. Get dressed. There's something I need to show you. He took her to a part of the mansion she had never seen before, down a narrow staircase behind the kitchen, through a reinforced door that required both a key and a code, into a basement that looked nothing like the elegant house above. Here, the walls were concrete, the lighting harsh, the air cool and dry. My father built this during the Cold War, Thomas explained as they walked. He was convinced nuclear war was inevitable. He wanted a place where the family could survive. They passed storage rooms filled with supplies, food, water, medical equipment, and a communications center that looked like something out of a spy movie. Finally, Thomas stopped before a door at the end of the corridor. Only 3 people have ever been in this room, he said. My father, Dominic, and me. Now you. He opened the door. Inside was a small office, sparse and functional. A desk, a chair, a computer, and one entire wall covered with photographs, documents, and strings, connecting them like a spider's web. Rose stepped closer, studying the wall. In the center was a photograph of a young blonde girl, Catalina. Around her, dozens of other images, people, places, newspaper clippings, handwritten notes, dates and names and question marks. This is your investigation, Rose breathed, into your sister's death. 12 years of it. Thomas stood beside her, his eyes tracing the familiar web. Every lead I've followed, every person I've questioned, every dead end I've hit. Rose scanned the wall, absorbing the scope of it. Her eyes caught on a photograph near the edge. A young woman, dark-haired and beautiful, with haunted eyes. Who is this? Thomas's expression tightened. Vivian Cross. The previous arrangement. Rose turned to face him fully. What happened to her? She was here for 4 months. Then, one morning she was simply gone. No note, no warning. She vanished in the middle of the night, and no one has seen her since. Thomas's voice was flat, controlled. My mother claimed she had been paid off and chose to leave. But Vivian left behind all her belongings. Her money was never touched. And 3 weeks after she disappeared, I received an anonymous letter with a single line. Ask your mother what she did. Rose felt cold. You think Margaret? I think my mother is capable of things I don't want to believe. I think she would do anything to protect this family, or her idea of it. And I think both Catalina and Vivian got in the way of something she wanted. Thomas turned to face Rose directly. That's why I brought you here. Because you're pregnant now. You're carrying the Francesco heir. And that makes you either the most protected person in this house, or the most threatened. Rose's hand moved instinctively to her belly. You think she would hurt me? Hurt the baby? I think she would do whatever she believed was necessary. She doesn't see people. She sees pieces on a board, obstacles to remove or tools to use. Thomas's voice softened. But I won't let her. I've made arrangements, protections, things even she doesn't know about. And now that you know the truth, you can protect yourself too. Rose looked at the wall again, at Catalina's smiling face, at Vivian's haunted eyes, and felt the weight of history pressing down on her. Why did you really choose me? She asked. Out of everyone you could have selected for this arrangement, why me? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Because of your application letter, he finally said. Everyone else wrote about what they wanted from the arrangement. The money, the opportunity, the chance at a better life. You were the only one who wrote about what you could offer. Your discretion, your adaptability, your understanding that some things are more important than romance or sentiment. He paused. You were practical, clear-eyed. You seemed like someone who could survive this family. And now? Thomas looked at her with an expression that made her heart stutter. Now I think you're so much more than that. And I think I made a terrible mistake. What mistake? Believing I could keep this transactional. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Believing I could watch you every day, see your courage and your grace and your stubborn refusal to break and not feel anything. Believing I could be in the same room with you and not want. He stopped himself, turned away. When he spoke again, his voice was controlled, distant. The car is waiting. Dominic will take you back upstairs. Thomas, please. The word was almost a whisper. I'm trying to do the right thing, to honor the agreement we made, but I can't do that if you look at me like that. So please, just go. Rose wanted to argue, wanted to cross the distance between them and finish what he had started. But she saw the tension in his shoulders, the rigid set of his jaw, and understood. He was fighting the same battle she was, and he was terrified of losing. She left without another word. But that night, lying in her bed with her hand on her growing belly, Rose finally admitted the truth she had been denying for months. She was in love with Thomas Francesco, and in 5 months, when the baby was born, she would have to leave him forever. The next 3 months passed in a strange, suspended state, caught between danger and desire. Marcus made no further moves, but his presence lingered like smoke in the air. Dominic's security teams patrolled constantly. Rose learned to recognize the guards' faces, to smile at the ones who stood outside her door, to pretend she didn't notice the guns beneath their jackets. Margaret, too, was quiet. Too quiet. She attended family dinners with perfect composure, made polite conversation about the pregnancy, even offered suggestions for the nursery. But her eyes, whenever they landed on Rose, held something cold and calculating. Rose watched her carefully, trusted nothing, and kept her distance. With Thomas, things grew more complicated. They had never spoken again about that moment in the basement, his unfinished confession, the tension that had crackled between them. But something had shifted. The careful distance they had maintained was eroding, worn away by daily proximity and shared meals and quiet evenings in the library, reading in comfortable silence. Thomas began to touch her more. Small things. A hand at her elbow when she navigated stairs, fingers brushing hers when he passed her a book. His palm pressed briefly against her belly when he thought she wasn't looking. Rose let herself lean into those touches. Let herself imagine, just for moments at a time, that this was real, that they were a real couple expecting their first child, that she wouldn't have to walk away. The fantasy was dangerous, she knew that. But she couldn't stop herself from wanting it. At 7 months pregnant, Rose's body had changed dramatically. The baby moved constantly now, kicks and rolls and hiccups that made her laugh and cry and marvel at the life growing inside her. Thomas had felt the movement once, his hand flat against her stomach, and the look on his face had been something she would carry with her forever. Wonder. Pure, unguarded wonder. She's strong, he had murmured. Like her father, Rose had replied without thinking. Thomas had looked at her then, and for one breathless moment she thought he would kiss her. But he hadn't. He had stepped back, as he always did, and the moment had passed. Now, at 8 months, Rose was beginning to feel the walls closing in. 1 month left, 4 weeks until the baby would be born, and the contract would enter its final phase. She would stay for the remainder of the 12 months, 2 more months after birth, and then she would walk away. Away from the mansion, away from her daughter, away from Thomas. The thought was unbearable, but she had signed the papers, made the agreement, taken the money that was already sitting in an account with her name on it. She had no legal claim to the child, no right to stay, no reason to believe that Thomas would want her to, despite the looks and touches that seemed to promise otherwise. He had never said he loved her, never suggested the arrangement could change, and Rose was too afraid of rejection to ask. The night everything changed started like any other. Rose was in the nursery, a beautiful room Thomas had designed himself, with soft grey walls and white furniture and a mobile of silver stars hanging above the crib. She came here sometimes when she couldn't sleep, sitting in the rocking chair, imagining the life that would fill this space. She was there when the first pain hit. It started low in her back, a dull ache she attributed to the strain of carrying extra weight. But then it wrapped around to her front, tightening like a band, and Rose knew. The baby was coming, 4 weeks early. "Thomas!" She tried to stand, but another contraction seized her, sharper than the first. "Thomas!" She heard running footsteps. Then Elena was there, face pale, but hands steady. "I've called Dr. Harmon. She's 20 minutes out. Mr. Francesco is on his way." "It's too early," Rose gasped. Babies come when they decide to come. Let's get you to bed." The next hours blurred together, pain and fear, and the distant sound of voices making decisions around her. Thomas arrived at some point, his face white, and took her hand in a grip so tight it almost hurt. "I'm here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." Dr. Harmon examined her, made phone calls, spoke in the calm, measured tones of medical professionals, trying not to alarm their patients. "The baby is stable," she finally announced. "But we can't stop the labor. This child is coming tonight." Rose looked at Thomas, terror in her eyes. "It's too soon. Something's wrong, something—" "Nothing is wrong." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Our daughter is just impatient, like her mother." Despite everything, Rose laughed, a short, broken sound that turned into a sob. "I'm scared." "I know." Thomas pressed his forehead to hers. "But you are the strongest person I know, and I will be right here every second. We're going to meet our daughter tonight. Together. Our daughter." He had never called her that before. Always the baby or the child, clinical terms that maintained the distance the contract required. But now, with the end approaching faster than either of them had expected, the pretense had finally crumbled. And when Thomas kissed her, really kissed her, for the first and perhaps the last time, Rose kissed him back with everything she had. Then another contraction came, and there was no more time for anything but the hard, sacred work of bringing new life into the world. Lily Rose Francesco was born at 3:17 in the morning, screaming her objection to the cold, bright world with lungs that were, as Dr. Harmon noted with satisfaction, perfectly healthy despite her early arrival. She was small, but perfect. Dark hair like her father, blue eyes that might stay blue or might change. 10 fingers, 10 toes, a rosebud mouth that searched immediately for her mother. Rose held her daughter and wept. This tiny creature, this miracle, was hers. For 2 more months, she was hers. And then, she couldn't think about the then. Not now. Not yet. Thomas stood beside the bed, one hand on Rose's shoulder, staring at his daughter with an expression of such naked love that it made Rose's heart crack. "She's beautiful," he whispered. "She's perfect," Rose agreed. They stayed like that as the night turned to dawn, a family suspended in a moment that couldn't last, pretending that the contract didn't exist, that the calendar wasn't counting down, that this fragile happiness could somehow survive what was coming. But outside the nursery, in the shadowed hallway, Margaret Francesco stood watching, and in her hand she held a phone, displaying a message she had sent only hours before. The message contained an address, a photograph, a name, Rose Mitchell. Real name, Rose Elizabeth Hartley, and the recipient of that message was Marcus Webb. The first 6 weeks of Lily's life were the happiest Rose had ever known. She had expected exhaustion, and there was plenty of that. The endless feedings, the sleepless nights, the constant vigilance of new motherhood. But beneath the tiredness was a joy so profound it frightened her. Every time Lily wrapped her tiny fingers around Rose's thumb, every time those dark eyes focused on her face, every time that small, warm body nestled against her chest, Rose felt her heart expand beyond what she had thought possible. And Thomas was there. Always there. He had moved into the room adjoining hers, ostensibly to help with night feedings. But Rose knew the truth. He couldn't bear to be far from either of them. She would wake at 2 in the morning to find him standing over the bassinet, watching Lily sleep with an expression of fierce tenderness that made Rose's breath catch. They didn't speak about the contract, didn't acknowledge the calendar pages falling away. Instead, they existed in a bubble of denial, pretending that this fragile happiness could last forever. But denial, like all temporary shelters, eventually collapses. It happened on a Tuesday, 6 weeks and 3 days after Lily's birth. Rose was in the garden, Catalina's garden, now Lily's garden too, with the baby in a carrier against her chest. The autumn air was crisp, the roses long since faded, but the evergreen hedges still provided shelter and privacy. Rose had come here to think, to prepare herself for the conversation she knew she had to have. 6 weeks left. 6 weeks until the contract ended and she was expected to walk away. She couldn't do it. She knew that now with absolute certainty. She couldn't leave her daughter, couldn't leave Thomas, couldn't return to a life that no longer had any meaning for her. But what was the alternative? Beg to stay. Ask Thomas to tear up a contract she had signed willingly. And even if he agreed, what then? She would be the woman who had been bought, the mother who had been paid to produce an heir. Every time Margaret looked at her, every time the society circles whispered, she would be reminded of how she had come to be here. Unless Thomas loved her. Unless he wanted her to stay, not as a convenience, but as his wife, his partner, the mother of his children, plural, God willing. But he had never said the words. Not once. Rose was so lost in thought that she didn't hear the footsteps until they were nearly upon her. She turned, expecting Eleanor, or perhaps one of the guards. Instead, she saw Marcus Webb. He stood at the entrance to the garden, blocking the only exit, wearing a tailored suit and a smile that made her blood freeze. He was exactly as she remembered, handsome in a cold, calculated way, with pale blue eyes that held no warmth, only possession. "Hello, Rose." His voice was silk over steel. "I told you I'd find you." Rose's arms tightened around Lily, her body instinctively curving to shield the baby. "How did you get in?" "I had help." Marcus took a step closer, then another, savoring her fear. "Someone in this house wanted me to find you. Someone who understands that you don't belong here." Margaret. Of course. Rose had known the woman was planning something, but this, to invite a monster into her own home to endanger her own grandchild, this was beyond anything Rose had imagined. "The guards have been dealt with, temporarily. We have about 10 minutes before reinforcements arrive." Marcus was close now, close enough that she could smell his cologne, the same scent that still haunted her nightmares. "I'm not here to hurt you, Rose. Not yet. I'm here to give you a choice." "What choice?" "Come with me now, willingly, and I'll let the child live." His eyes flicked to Lily, sleeping peacefully against Rose's chest. "Refuse, and I'll take you anyway, but I'll leave something behind for your Mr. Francesco to remember you by." Rose's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear over it. Her mind raced through options, calculating distances, searching for weapons, finding nothing. "If you hurt her, Thomas will hunt you to the ends of the earth. Thomas Francesco is a businessman playing at being dangerous. I am the real thing." Marcus reached out, his fingers brushing Lily's dark hair, and Rose flinched back with a sound like a wounded animal. "Clock's ticking, Rose." "What's it going to be?" Rose looked into those cold blue eyes and saw her death written there. Marcus would never let her go. Even if she went with him willingly, even if she submitted to whatever horrors he had planned, eventually he would tire of her, or she would try to escape again, and he would kill her. But if she fought now, if she resisted, Lily might be caught in the crossfire. Her daughter, her perfect, innocent daughter, who had done nothing except be born to a mother with too much past and not enough future. Rose made her decision. "Let me put her down," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "In the bassinet by the bench. Then I'll come with you. No struggle, no screaming. Just let me put my daughter somewhere safe." Marcus considered this, then nodded. 10 seconds. Rose walked to the stone bench where a small, portable bassinet sat. She had brought it for moments just like this, peaceful afternoons in the garden. She laid Lily down with infinite gentleness, pressing a kiss to her forehead, breathing in her scent one last time. "I love you," she whispered. "Whatever happens, know that I loved you more than anything in this world." Then she straightened, turned to face Marcus, and saw Thomas standing behind him with a gun pressed to the back of his head. "Whatever happens next," Thomas said, his voice dangerously quiet, "depends entirely on you, Mr. Webb." Rose watched as the color drained from Marcus's face. He hadn't heard Thomas approach, neither had she. "Francesco, this doesn't concern you. She's mine. She was never yours. She was never anyone's property." Thomas's finger tightened on the trigger. "On your knees, hands behind your head." For a moment, Rose thought Marcus would comply. His shoulders slumped, his hands began to rise. But she knew him better than anyone. She saw the tension in his wrist, the slight shift of weight that preceded violence. "Thomas, he has a—" Marcus spun, drawing a knife from his sleeve, slashing toward Thomas's face. Thomas dodged but lost his grip on the gun, which went skittering across the stones. The two men collided, grappling, and Rose saw the knife flash between them. She didn't think. She grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy iron trowel Elena used for gardening, and swung. The impact made a sound she would hear in her dreams for years. Marcus crumpled. Thomas stood over him, breathing hard, blood seeping from a gash on his forearm. "Is he—" "Unconscious." Rose's whole body was shaking. "The baby is fine." I can hear her breathing. Thomas pulled her into his arms, trowel and all, holding her so tightly she could feel his heart hammering against her cheek. "You're okay. You're both okay." "How did you know?" "Dominic intercepted a message from my mother. We've been tracking Webb since he crossed the property line." Thomas pulled back to look at her, his eyes wild with something that looked like terror finally releasing. "I almost lost you. You didn't. I'm here. We're here." In the bassinet, Lily began to cry, a thin, indignant wail, as if protesting the disturbance to her nap. Rose laughed through her tears and went to gather her daughter, holding her close, breathing her in. Thomas came to stand beside her, his uninjured arm wrapping around them both. "I can't lose you," he said against her hair. "Either of you. I know what the contract says. I know what we agreed. But I'm asking you, Rose. I'm begging you. Don't go." Rose looked up at him, her vision blurred with tears. "I don't want to go." "Then stay. Not as an arrangement. Not as a contract. As my wife. My real wife." Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his eyes more vulnerable than she had ever seen them. "I love you. I've loved you for months, and I've been too much of a coward to say it. But almost watching you die put things in perspective. I don't care about the terms we agreed to. I don't care what my mother thinks or what anyone says. I want you. I want our daughter. I want whatever comes next, as long as we face it together." Rose's heart was so full she thought it might burst. "What about Marcus? What about your mother? There's still so much—" "We'll deal with it, together." Thomas pressed his forehead to hers. "Say yes. Please, Rose, say you'll stay." Rose looked at her daughter, safe in her arms. She looked at the man she loved, bleeding and desperate and more honest than he had ever been. And she said the only word that mattered. Yes. The aftermath unfolded over the following weeks like a tapestry being rewoven. Marcus Webb was turned over to authorities with evidence of his previous crimes: stalking, assault, attempted murder. Dominic had been thorough in his investigation, building a case that would ensure Marcus spent decades behind bars. The night he was sentenced, Rose slept through the night for the first time in years. Margaret was more complicated. Thomas confronted his mother the day after the attack, in the same study where she had plotted against Rose. What passed between them, Rose never fully knew. But when Thomas emerged, his face was carved from stone. "She's leaving," he said. "The house in Monaco. She'll have her allowance, her lifestyle, her reputation. But she will never set foot in this house again. And if she ever contacts Marcus Webb or anyone associated with him, everything she's done will become public." "What about Catalina?" Rose asked softly. "And Vivian?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. She confessed. "Not to murder. She claims she's innocent of that, and I almost believe her. But she admitted to covering up what she knew. Catalina was involved with someone Margaret disapproved of, a groundskeeper's son. When Catalina threatened to run away with him, my mother intervened. There was an argument by the lake. Catalina fell. Whether it was an accident or not, my mother will carry that truth to her grave. And Vivian paid to disappear. A significant sum funneled through accounts even I couldn't trace. She's alive, living in Portugal under a new name. I've sent word that if she ever needs anything, she can contact me. But the choice is hers." Rose took his hand, saying nothing, offering only presence. Some wounds could not be healed, only carried. They were married properly in the spring, in Catalina's garden, surrounded by roses in full bloom. It was a small ceremony. Elena, Dominic, a handful of trusted friends, and Lily, who slept through the entire thing in her grandmother's arms. Not Margaret. Rose's mother, who had been found living quietly in a small town in Vermont, who had spent years believing her daughter was dead, who had wept for 3 hours when Rose finally called. The truth about Rose's past, her real name, her family, everything she had hidden, came out slowly, piece by piece. Thomas listened to all of it without judgment. What mattered was who she was now, not who she had been running from. As for the contract, that slim folder of papers that had once defined their entire relationship, Thomas burned it himself on the night before their wedding while Rose watched. "No more terms," he said, watching the pages curl and blacken. "No more conditions. Just us. Just them." And Lily, who grew stronger every day, who had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, who would never know about the contract or the danger or the women who had come before. She would know only that she was loved, fiercely, completely, without conditions. That was the legacy the Francescos would leave now. Not secrets and shadows and deals made in desperation. Love. Honest and imperfect and absolutely unconditional. On the 1-year anniversary of the day Rose had signed the contract, she stood at the window of the master bedroom, their bedroom now, watching the sunset paint the gardens in shades of gold and amber. Thomas came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" This time last year I was terrified. I had just signed my life away to a stranger, and I was convinced I would never feel safe or happy again. Rose leaned back into his warmth. And now? She turned in his arms, looking up at the man who had become her home. "Now I can't imagine my life any other way." Thomas kissed her, slow and deep, the kind of kiss that still made her knees weak after a year of kissing him. "I have something for you," he said when they finally broke apart. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Rose laughed. "We're already married, you know." "I know. But I never properly proposed. I asked you to stay in a garden after almost losing you to a madman. You deserved better." He opened the box, revealing a ring, not her wedding band, but something new. A delicate band of white gold with 3 stones, a sapphire, a diamond, and a ruby. The sapphire is for Lily, her birthstone. The diamond is for you. The ruby is for me. 3 lives, woven together. Rose's eyes filled with tears. Thomas, you gave me everything, Rose. A daughter, a future, a reason to be better than I was. He slipped the ring onto her finger next to her wedding band. This is my promise that I will spend every day earning what you've given me, that I will never take it for granted, that no matter what comes, you will never be alone again. Rose looked at the ring, at the 3 stones glinting in the fading light, and felt a peace she had never known was possible. She had come to this house expecting a transaction. She had found a family. She had come expecting to hide. She had found the courage to be seen. She had come expecting to leave. And instead, she had finally come home. That night, after Lily was asleep in her crib and the mansion was quiet, Rose stepped out onto the balcony and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Catalina was at peace. Vivian was building a new life. Margarethe was living with the consequences of her choices. And Marcus was behind bars, where he would stay until he was too old to hurt anyone. The ghosts had been laid to rest. The debts had been paid. All that remained was the living. Thomas joined her on the balcony, 2 glasses of wine in hand. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked eventually. "Signing that contract?" Rose considered the question seriously, as she did everything. "I regret the circumstances that made it necessary. I regret the years I lost to fear. I regret that Lily will one day ask how her parents met, and will have to decide how much truth to tell." She took a sip of wine. "But regret the contract itself?" "No, because it led me here. To you. To her. To this life I never dreamed I could have." Thomas pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Then I don't regret it either. Not a single moment." They stayed there until the wine was gone and the night had grown cold, wrapped in each other and the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. A contract had brought them together. But love, stubborn, unexpected, undeniable love, had made them a family. And some contracts, Rose knew now, were only the beginning of the story. If you stayed until here, know that this story only exists because someone like you chose to listen. Thank you for lending your time, your imagination, and your heart. Stories are bridges, and you just crossed this one with me. I hope to see you in the next one.